Hello there, Geraldine Doog welcoming you to another in the Bishop Vincent Presents series, and in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to pay my respects to the Darug and Gundagara people on whose lands we sit, and I pay my respects to all their elders past, present and emerging. Now, I'm delighted to say that we're here to welcome Professor Miriam Vylens, who's a theologian and canon lawyer who will thoroughly entertain you, I do warn you. She's at the University of Erfurt in Germany, and she's been closely involved in the Global Synod on Synodality. And she is obsessed, really, with the role of the laity in the future church, and has very developed thoughts and some wonderful stories about how this can be progressed, and really a message for everybody in the church. She was also an advisor here, you may remember, for the report commissioned by the Australian bishops, The Light from the Southern Cross, promoting co-responsible governance in the Catholic Church in Australia, which I think is a really wonderful report, which a lot of reports have been out, but it's really worth going back to that. So her work does focus on church reform and the response to clerical sexual abuse. And this year, she became the first Catholic woman to be elected to the World Council of Churches leadership. So she's really a trailblazing lay Catholic, which is the topic of her public lectures here in Australia on the, and I quote, the prophetic voice of the laity in the renewal of the Catholic Church. So Miriam Vylens, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be back in Australia.
Look, we're going to get onto the role of the laity, which is, very much your focus in the renewal of the church. But could I start with something you said in an interview about being inside the Paul VI Hall last October? It really affected us. I felt you could really breathe in this hall, and that people had a widened perspective, a widening of the tent, as the Synod documents, that beautiful phrase of the Synod documents called for, giving space for everyone's voice. Now, can you describe that feeling of being able to breathe?
Yeah, so there was the traditional Synod Hall, which was built for the Synods after the Synod as an institution was established by Pope Paul VI in 1965. And it's a theatre setting. And it's clearly made not for people like I am from the Netherlands, taller people. It's made for small people, so you're squeezed in, and there are no windows. And one bishop said to me, you kind of sit there, you fall in your chair in the morning. They were sitting according to the day of their ordination, so the ancienity. And he said, for 4 weeks you sit beside the same person and you fall asleep because there's no air. And so when this time, the Synod was meeting in the large Synod Hall, and we were meeting at round tables, which was a gift of the Church of Asia, really, because they brought this in, that you could sit at round tables where everybody has an equal position. But when you arrive in that room, there is this very high ceiling. So it was very light, there was a lot of space, literally going upwards. And so there was a way to breathe. And I was actually quite concerned in the preparations whether 10 people at a table, so you have quite a large table, how that would go with the noise level. Because if you are a little bit older, you might have a hearing problem. And how would that go in such a room? But they tested that out and it worked perfectly and people were very happy, yeah.
And so you sensed that there was just more interplay, more exchange, almost because of the circumstances.
No, it was not because of the circumstances. The circumstances were made in that way. So it was very deliberately thought, how can we best do this? So it was not an accident. The idea was indeed that people this time would speak with each other and in particular would listen to each other. Mm. And in the past, we would have a document like now. We had a document, maybe 4 chapters, let's say each chapter 15 numbers, and person A would get up and he would speak about chapter 1, section 3, and the next one would be a chapter 3, section 14. And so you would go back and forth, and they were supposed to hand in their address before the meeting. So there was no following up, there was no listening. Everybody was just bringing in their point. And here, everybody was invited to first listen and not to comment, but to listen, and then in a second round to say, after I listened to all the other 9 people, this is what I heard. And this is what resonates with me. And here so there was also continuously the question, how can we get further? How can we get deeper on a consensus? I personally learned in this whole synodal process so far how important language is. So you can use phrases that set up a pro and a contra. But you can also use, for example, so we had in the document, in the final document, in the synthesis report, it has convergences, but then you could say, where are there tensions? But you can also say, where are there issues about which we need more conversation? And that opens up the conversation. We had a meeting in which the central questions were, how can we engage women more in the leadership of the church? It wasn't a question, should we? A should we is a yes or no answer. But how is already, of course, accepting that you will do this. But then you get in creativity of people, of what could be done. But you can also hear that the one person from, let's say, the Philippines is saying, well, this is one way of doing it. And then maybe an Australian is saying, but we have the experience of doing this or that. And then maybe somebody from Canada will say, oh, that's kind of interesting.
That's your idea, is it, of grasping synodality, you say, rather than learning it. It was another thing you said.
Yeah, I in drafting documents, I really kind of, and I ask, I mean, English is not my first language, but I ask English-speaking people, is the word grasp not a better word than think or understand? Because that's a very cognitive expression. And to grasp, I think, goes far beyond just a mere cognitive notion.
I think it's Cardinal Hollerich who also made a point along the lines of what you're talking about, that in a world that is so polarised at the moment, it dominates my working life, just reporting the polarities, the church is doing something very valid and real and tangible about breaching polarities. Now, for the first time, I've really grasped that and thought this could be an offering to the world. I mean, the synodality can be, I'm totally for it, but it can be hard to completely, hang on to. But that is being learned, isn't it? How to bridge polarities.
I had a beautiful experience of that in Prague. So in the whole process, we had continental meetings. So if you allow me, I will just briefly explain. So we began in all the dioceses. The dioceses would write a summary report, send it to the Episcopal Conference. The Episcopal Conference sent it to Rome. Then we made the document, enlarge the space of your tent. And that was sent back to the people saying, did we really hear what you have been saying? And by the way, wouldn't it be interesting for you, Australia, to hear what they were saying in Korea and in Argentina and in Luxembourg, in Malawi? And we decided that it would be good to have continental meetings for that. Now, Europe had a continental meeting, and Europe is composed of 39 Episcopal conferences in 45 countries. We met in 5 languages. And the tensions that the European Union is meeting in Brussels between East and West and the different parties there, of course, these tensions are also in the church. So the same polarization is there. But we managed within 3 days to get a document about which everybody agreed, from the Germans to the Hungarians to everybody agrees. And it had something to do with the language we used to express the tension. So I can give you an example. A Western European country like Belgium would say, we have to embrace secularity. This is the reality in which the church lives. We better face up to that, and we have to see how we interact with that. If you were coming from Eastern Europe, it's very difficult, because of the history with the communists, it's very difficult to embrace the society around you, because this is how you survive, by not embracing it. So there was a tension. And the question is then, how can you put that tension from the one side and the other side into one phrase, and recognizing that there are different positions, but you respect both positions? There was a question about, there was also a very touchy and difficult one, which I think in Australia you can appreciate, the child sexual abuse. So again, Malta, Ireland, Belgium, they were saying there is also a systemic component to this. There's not only the abuse by the individual, but there are other countries in Europe which haven't faced up to the issue of child sexual abuse. So they say, no, this is the fault of the priest who did it. But there is no problem to the whole system. So again, we had to bring that into one paragraph, the two positions, and we were able, in the way we worded that, to have both positions in the same text. What was remarkable after that whole continental session was that I got an invitation from the European ambassadors accredited to the Holy See. And they asked me, can you come and speak with us and explain what happened in Prague? And how were you able to draft in 3 days a document? And we in Brussels are not able to do that. So the political world is also looking, and so the question is, we are not just practicing this. So Cardinal Hollerich is absolutely right. We are not just doing this for the Catholic Church internally on how to live with each other, but if we would be successful, we could really be a very, very credible witness to the world and help the world to overcome this polarization.
Has it changed you? Just the way, what you're describing there is quite profound, of course, and as a European. But, where does it take you personally? Does it take you out of your comfort zone, or is it in order to write something, if you see the point I'm trying to make?
No, I think I'm really diving into it. And I noticed that that it is changing me. It's changing my language. It's changing how I listen to people. It's a different way of living. It's a different way of living.
And what biblically inspires you to do this? Again, I'm trying to draw the distinction between sort of a sociological adaptation, I suppose, and something drawn from theology, from our great tradition.
Well, I think for myself, biblically, one thing I think is really my baptism, to discover what that really means. Mm-hmm. Although I've been working on this for many, many years, but as a theologian, you work very much on the rational categories, so the thinking. But this has a different effect, yeah. And then maybe this is kind of interesting. So my name is Miriam, and people, not everybody knows that Miriam was the sister of Moses. And Miriam, the sister of Moses, is, when I was a little child, I had a little brother. So the story was a story that was read to me, and I really loved it, of this Miriam looking after her little brother Moses, and I could identify with that. And then when I later grew up, reading that Miriam is saying to Moses and Aaron, her both brothers, you better get your act together and do something about these people and this situation. Now, she is also punished for that, but later she celebrates when they get through the Red Sea. She celebrates. She takes a tambourine and she says, "Let's dance and celebrate all of this." So I really hope that for me that's a great inspiration to live up to my own name. Yeah.
Now, just getting back to Cardinal Hollerich, Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich, he's, of course, Relator General of the Synod, so this is a pretty important set of statements he made. And he acknowledged at the launch of the Instrumentum Laboris, the working document for the October Assembly, that greater diversity is the, quotes, ideal situation where we want to go, but that the 4 male European clerics who presented the document are the actual situation, which was quite sort of blunt, I suppose. Now, he's also sort of said, if women don't feel comfortable in our church, we are failing as Christians. I just wonder, really, how you see that tension, given that you sort of, you're making a specialty of diving into tension, that tension between those two truths, I suppose, that he articulated.
Well, I think the other documents that were presented in the past, there was always a woman present. I was present at the press conference for the launch of the preparatory document. There was a British woman present for the enlarge the space of your tent. There was a Swiss woman present for the, I think it was a meeting, it was the first Instrumentum Laboris. So I don't know exactly how it came this time to no woman present. But I think the reality is, if you look in the room of the people who were involved in reading the reports around the world, bringing this document together, we see not only men and women, but we also see, and I think this is very important, people from all parts of the world, especially the Global South. Because, and this, I think, I published a book called The People of God Have Spoken, about the continental meetings. And the book has not only the final documents of each continent, but also a report about what actually happened in these 7 continental meetings. Who was there? How did they meet? What biblical text did they use? How did the process unfold? And what you can really see is the Global South is ahead of the Western world in this whole synodal process. We are really behind. We are really behind. So in the 7 continental meetings, the South Americans they are really ahead of the ballgame. And I think Pope Francis takes a lot of his inspiration from his experience from the Global South, which, and this is beautiful, this is Catholicity. He brings this experience to the World Church and saying, look at it, and maybe this is also something for you. The second group that is really very advanced are the Asians. So the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conference is very engaged in this. And then we see the Africans. Last year in October, the African bishop said, we already set up dates for meetings. The rooms have been reserved. We know that we have to meet between now and next year. We don't know yet the subjects, but we do know that we have to meet. So if we now look on the preparation for the continental meetings, we see that South America has its meeting at the end of, it's next week. So they have first a meeting with all the seminaries and theological faculties, and then a meeting with the delegates of the synod. Asia is meeting today. It begins its meeting today for 3 days. They're meeting in Bangkok. Africa had already some meetings. The Europeans will meet at the end of August. Yeah, and Oceania and North America are not meeting at all. So, so you can really see that the Global South is picking up the ball and running with it.
Now, I have to say, because I think a lot of our viewers will be saying, yes, but is that process, and are they dodging some of these difficult areas now? You know, because you have to name the tension. Do they name the tensions, sort of thing that you do they? And do they move beyond that? I mean, I think a lot of people will say, well, yes, but you know, is it more talking around the same thing or not?
No, I don't. First of all, we have to see that these meetings are taking place of bishops with other members of the faithful.
I see.
So they are implementing already a different understanding of what church is all about. South America has already, beside the Episcopal Conference and the Continental Structure for Bishops, a whole body of rest of the faithful represented who gathers together with the bishops. That is already in place.
And that's a big change.
And that's a big change. South America, I mean, the other thing is the whole world is asking for formation. South America set up a course on synodality with 70,000 participants in 5 languages. So I don't want to say, oh, they're just talking. They're getting the people involved, the people are participating. The Africans have week after week at the moment lectures on the relationship between bishops and religious, the role of women in society, how to deal with the digital world. The African Church has 120 people who are currently being educated to be influencers. So I wouldn't want to say they are just talking.
So why is the West, broadly described, why is it
It's
behind?
the Western world
Why?
that has a bigger problem of catching on, and I don't know what I think the other churches are younger churches.
Right.
Younger churches. I mean, younger in the sense of the participants are really, really much younger. So there is a different dynamic there.
I mean, is there less power at stake? I mean, if there are big, deep traditions in the Western churches that are hard to overturn or to change, to fiddle with, is that it? You know?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, look at the Germans. I mean, they have, like, you had a plenary council. The Germans have a synodal way. So these topics are going there as well. But I think this is one thing that we will have to discover. How can we get And Pope Francis has said this, Europe is tired, and it is tired. So but I think the same goes for the Western world everywhere. We see the same pattern from what I can judge, but I'm just visiting here in Australia, but also in...
A bit different I know what you're saying. It's a bit different in Australia. Australia, you do feel the youth, I think, of Australia, the developed, settled Australia, not old Australia. And there is a sense that there's a vigour and an optimism that one senses is not necessarily around a lot in Europe at the moment. So maybe...
Well, I'm very happy for Australia that it is a young church. It's young, if you tell me that. I have not seen that yet, but it will be lovely to...
Well, I'm not saying it's making major advances, but I do think Australia as a whole is a different... There's a different zeitgeist. Sure. Look, I want to go back to that question of how it came to be. I mean, you can avoid these things. How on earth did 4 cardinals at this point present that document without a woman present? I mean, you've said
you have to ask them. I do not make those decisions.
I mean, it just does suggest that there's certain degrees of understanding, and then there's gaps, massive gaps.
Like I said, you have to ask them. I did not make these decisions.
Well, what do you see coming in October in terms of this discussion about whether women can feel more comfortable? I think it was an interesting way the Cardinal put it. If women don't feel comfortable in the church, we're failing. Now, can you see this being a big part of the discussion, or do you think, I know a lot of it is being pushed off into other discussions post-synod. How do you see it?
No, I think the document that we are, that is currently on the table, the Instrumentum Laboris, the working document, has a specific section on women, number 13 till 17, and it will, in that section, it says that women, that God chose, this is a beautiful sentence, God chose women to be the first witnesses of the resurrection. And then it moves on to say that women should have their recognized place in the church, but also in this, I think, I'm a canon lawyer, the document does say there is much more possible for women, but that's not used in our church. So, for example, we had a review or a reform, you can call it, of the Roman Curia. And when the Roman Curia was reformed, there was the document that presents that reform. The then professor, but later he was made a cardinal, Ghirlanda, said, well, everybody working in Rome at the different dicasteries, they have only delegated power from the Pope. And he said there is no reason why the heads of these dicasteries, who are currently mostly cardinals, could not be women. And so you can imagine it was a little shock in Rome, really. And then they realized, yeah, of course this is true, except for these areas for which you would need ordination. So there would be a lot of dicasteries where indeed women could be the head of the dicastery. The question then comes, if this is possible in Rome for the Roman Curia, what does that mean for the dioceses? And I was recently in a meeting of canon lawyers in Rome, and one of my colleagues said, oh, there was a beautiful thing that happened in France. A bishop asked his priest and said, who should I appoint as a new vicar general? And they said, I mean, this is a fictive name and therefore a British name, Mrs. Smith. And there was a Mrs. Smith. So the bishop appointed this woman to be the new vicar general.
Who was obviously not an ordained person.
Who is obviously not an ordained person and is not a man. So they looked into, and we have this now in different dioceses in France, in Germany, you get more and more people who will take that parallel position. And so we had a conversation about that. What does that really mean to work with that delegated power? And I think the canon lawyers are there to be creative and to read the text that we have and to interpret that in light of the new developments. But that takes us to the question, what are the canon lawyers at the moment doing? Where are they sitting? And do they have the width of the theological knowledge to see the openings that are there?
Well, do they?
I think the canon lawyers for a very long time have been trained, like you have medical doctors who are trained how to solve a problem. You have others who study research in the medical world and they will further develop. So the doctors have to go for regular sessions to be updated on what's possible. Now, if you train people just for today's understanding and today's challenges, something else is to train them for the future so that they can think and develop their own categories. And I think that's the same question for the canon lawyers and for civil lawyers too. But how do we train them? And do we have sufficient people with sufficient theological background to do that? And that is really a challenge. Now, this is also true, we have few faculties of canon law in the world. So, for example, it's a real practical question. What is the accessibility for women, lay women, to study canon law and to work in this domain, for example? It's really a challenge.
Is the Pope aware of this challenge, do you think?
I think the Pope is asking everybody to have a change of mind. And that goes for people who apply the law, that goes for all the domains in which we are working.
Could there be reform from within? Like, is this a developing conversation among canon lawyers, would you say?
Actually, I was in Australia, invited a few years ago in 2016, and I gave a talk here entitled Hitting the Reset Button. And in that talk, I was trying to explain, because the Pope had just given the address about 50 years of the Synod, saying what this Pope is doing, Pope Francis, is he's not creating something new. He is presenting to us Vatican II, and hitting the reset button means on your computer you reconfigure the programs to run your computer. Now, most of us are not interested in those background programs. We just want the thing to work, and we type and a text should appear and we can print it and that's it. But sometimes it needs to optimize so to have that. So Vatican II had brought in all the different aspects, but there were tensions in the documents, and the tensions stood and stand beside each other. So you have a chapter in the Constitution on the Church on the people of God, but you also have a chapter on the hierarchy, on the laity, on the religious. That chapter on the people of God was very consciously inserted before the specific groups were addressed, so to speak. But what they did not do is when they inserted that chapter, they did not rework the other chapters. So there are tensions. And the question is then, this is what I wrote in that article, we have to set up those glasses of the people of God and use these lenses to read these three chapters that follow, and thus use that as an interpretation for the current law. But that means that you accept that there is an evolving understanding of law. Now, this is not new. Some people might say, canon lawyers, oh, do we have the authority? And I said to the canon lawyers here in Australia and New Zealand, we should ask ourselves what actually happened in 1965 when the council closed and there was a code of 1917. Because Pope Paul VI very clearly said the code of 1917 is still in force. So how did they handle that? A new vision with an old law. And the canon lawyers became creative. And the Germans, being good scholars, they wrote articles about how to handle this tension and how to understand an evolving interpretation based on a doctrine that evolves after the promulgation of the laws, or the doctrine that gave rise to the law originally. So
so the rubrics are there, in other words, you're saying?
Yeah, so what we have, so then I said, interesting is your canon law society was created after 65, because the canon lawyers said, in a synodal way, we should think together how we can help the community in Australia, in New Zealand. What proposals can we make? And then they did a lot of ad experimentum legislation, would approve it for 5 years, for example, do an evaluation, which is quite what we are doing today in our societies, have an evaluation, and then say, okay, this is what is good. And that's ultimately, all this experimentation from around the world led to the 1983 code. A challenge is certainly that many canon lawyers, also in Australia, were trained in the 1980s. So they were trained very close to the promulgation of the law. So there was no need to think about this evolving interpretation, because it just came out of the oven, so to speak. But now we do have that 40 years later, and we should look into that. So then, if you have new glasses, if we all go to the optician and we get the new glasses and with fresh lenses, I think there is much more possible in the law, but you have to see it.
Two questions flow from that. Does that mean, I'll be blunt, that can you see a chance for women being ordained in any way? I'm thinking of deacons, of course. And secondly, I suppose the other thing that comes from that is the question of whether you get politics into that whether you get culture wars coming into that reinterpretation, which does bedevil broader societies.
I don't think there's a need for culture wars if you move about this in a synodal way, if you listen to the people. So at the moment we have this whole process of reinterpreting Vatican II,
Yes.
so the notion of synodality, and then we have to say, okay, if this is what the sense of the faithful is, and it's identical from all over the world, this is so remarkable. So I can give an example. The Code of Canon Law leaves it says, if circumstances recommend it, a bishop can establish a diocesan pastoral council. Now, around the world, the faithful are asking, please make this obligatory. If I ask canon lawyers, what does that mean if circumstances recommend it? And they say, well, it's up to the bishop to decide. Then I say, is that really? It doesn't say the bishop can decide. It says, if circumstances recommend. Would that not require a discernment process? And
a what?
A discernment
A discernment process. Mm-hmm.
And would you then not need criteria for that discernment process? And if the criteria could these criteria, would we not have to take them from this new understanding of synodality? So that the bishop, for example, is really ordained at the service of the community.
Yeah.
That the bishop, I know a bishop who told, if we had a conversation about, it's a beautiful story. He came to a lecture that I gave, and he said, lecture was entitled "The People of God and Hierarchy as Service." And he said to me, I'm just taking over a new diocese. I don't think I'm going to have the diocesan pastoral council. And then I said to him, Bishop, do you actually celebrate the sacrament of confirmation? He looked like, why are you asking that question? I said, well, do you? He said, yeah. And I said, how is it? Oh, it's great. All these young people, church is packed, great atmosphere, beautiful music. And then I said, so you are celebrating what is part of that sacrament? What is it? He said, it's the Holy Spirit. So I said, so is the Holy Spirit working? I mean, you are administering the sacrament. Is it working? And he said, I don't know. I said, how come you don't know? Well, how am I to find out? I said, that's why you should have a diocesan pastoral council. And the bishop went home and he reflected on this, and he then re-established a diocesan pastoral council. And he told me two things. He said, I'm amazed, he said, of what people bring, their talents, the willingness to invest in this. And then he said, we now make the ad limina report. We have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 15-year plan. And so when we write the ad limina report, we basically use this and look back and say, what have we achieved? Where do we need to improve? But he said, what? You know, he said to me, what it also did to me, I decided I need supervision. I said, oh, really? Yeah, he said, I go to a Protestant lady, he said, Protestant, because I don't want anybody from my own community. And it's really helping me to reflect on why I make the decisions I make and how I make them. I would say that is a whole new attitude. And he is saying it's so beautiful. He was appointed by the Holy See to do to make a report about the viability of a diocese in a very rural area of his country. And he told me that, he said, I went to every parish for a Sunday, celebrated with the people the Eucharist, and then I asked them, if today you would have to make a choice, where would you want to be as a diocese? And he said, we clergy would have said, they all have to merging of 2 dioceses. But the people told us, because I listened to them, oh, no, we don't want to go with that diocese, because we go for sports event, for culture, for medical care, hospitals, all of that. We go to city A, and another part of the diocese was going to city B. So they decided at the end that the diocese, it should be split, and one part goes to A and another to B. But he said it was only because I went there, celebrated with the people the Eucharist, sat down with them, we had a meal together. It took a Sunday, each parish, a whole Saturday or Sunday. And he said, but we brought them on board. And then I had a very different document. So the law is saying the Episcopal Conference can make a proposal. But the bishop has the new lenses and says, no, I have to listen to the people. And the law is not forbidding that.
So there could be much more localised decision making.
Yeah, and this is one of the interesting things in the whole current process in the Synod. So that when we began, so the Pope said, we are not having a synod on synodality top down. A week after he opened it, it was in every diocese of the world. And then it came back, like I said, to a document enlarged as Space of Your Tent, and went to the continents. Why? Because the idea was the continents have different cultural settings. So in talking with my colleagues from Asia, they are a minority in a very strong religious society. Europe, the Christians are becoming more and more a minority in a secularized environment. So that requires a different kind of dialogue and a different kind of interaction. We have different means. I mean, a country like Australia, so large, is very different from the Netherlands, where going from one side to the other, somebody once said to me in the time when we were still smoking, if you have a good cigar, it takes only one cigar to go to the other side of the country. Yeah? So, but the people still perceive that as a long distance, but it's only 160 kilometers. So to deal with that, then the financial resources, it's all very different.
And you still remain Catholic, follow through on all of this, and you still think you could feel it's a Catholic church?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of it. And I think we have to discover the unity that we have. But then when you travel around, you also see that there is a diversity in how people do things.
Before we stop, I just must ask you something you were talking to me about earlier before we started chatting, that whether the media, so we're having this sort of conversations internally in some parts, but the outside world is not necessarily seeing it, is it? I mean, and the story about how the media sometimes approaches you and then drops you.
Well, it's kind of interesting because so the media enforces, sometimes I get the impression, the traditional images. So I've had this experience now a few times. Invited for a television interview, and then just as you are about to leave for the studio, then they call you and they say, oh, we're really sorry, but we're so delighted that we found a bishop to talk to. And I'm like, and then they ask the bishop about the increasing role and why are women not visible. But they contribute, so the media contributes to the image that the Catholic Church can only be represented by bishops.
I wonder how that will change, because obviously the media, pushed as they are, as I know, they quickly reach for something someone's written. Oh God, okay, that person represents, they've written something good, we'll get them. Are women contributing to the public conversation sufficiently, do you think, within the church?
Well, I think we do, right? I mean, if you look at my list of publications, I don't know if bishops write or if they have lay people draft the text for
but
them.
they've got that title, of course, which makes a difference.
Well, they have the clothes and the title. And we love the clothes and the title because then we don't have to... So I think it's for the media to investigate what that really means and how come we choose. We just had a conversation in German television. It was very interesting because the European politicians were saying that in the talk shows, they are not inviting European politicians, but only national politicians. And to what extent would that contribute to the knowledge of the people about what Europe is actually doing? So there's now a strong conversation in Germany. It's past 7 days or something, but the public stations.
This is the optics of the whole thing.
Why are the European politicians not invited? And then they have to explain why we are spending so much money on Europe, or why Europe is important, and why we should not vote with all the elections that are going on in Europe at the moment for or against the European Union.
Look, final question, really. I mean, you do sound very invigorated, I must say, because you very much contributed to the Light from the Southern Cross document. I might add, in that document, one of the recommendations was for a Centre for Catholic Leadership to be set up, a public Centre for Catholic Leadership, which I thought was a wonderful idea. I've seen nothing really, well, there's so much happening in the church, I've seen nothing specific about that. I mean, are you seeing that? Are you seeing developments in terms of public institutions that do represent this model that you're describing?
I don't know exactly what's happening in Australia. That I just would not know what they have developed, what has come out of that. I just don't know. I think there are some projects going on with the so-called public juridic persons, but I don't know.
But elsewhere around the world, are you seeing the incipient growth of different public institutions or not? Maybe not yet is the right.
No, maybe not yet. I think we are in this major transition in the Western world again of the religious, especially the religious women who were so strongly. I mean, this is another question. When today a woman is appointed as the head of a hospital, it's in the newspapers. But the sisters have been running the hospitals for years, and they were never in the newspapers. And when the sister who built the hospital is retiring, the question is whether it will be in the newspaper. So I remember an Australian friend, Ken, a lawyer of me, she said, the principals in the schools, when the sisters were running the schools, the sisters were the principals. And now the ones who take it over are men. We see this certainly in Europe, in the hospitals. The heads of a unit, of a ward, I think you call it a unit or ward, whatever, the head nurse there used to be a sister, a nun. Now it's a male. There's nothing against it, but these positions are changing, and it's interesting how the women religious had that.
Well, I mean, final question. Really, you're hinting at, in my opinion, at female confidence. I mean, is there a confidence growing? Clearly, you think there needs to be that women do claim their space, whether or not they have the actual moniker of ordination or whatever. I mean, is that on the turn?
No, this is what the Synod is saying. There are so many opportunities for women, but they remain untapped. And the question is, what can we do? What is possible to implement that? What can we do to change that?
And that's what preoccupies you?
No, it's what preoccupies the whole church. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in the document. It's not in the document. The document is saying it remains untapped. And if you make a list of all the positions, like just before, I think it was it last year? Anyway, somewhere in the Synod process, there's a specific magazine that is published in the Vatican, Donna Chiesa Mondo. It's a document on women and the church and the world. And so they had an article that I wrote for them on what can women already do. But it's published in a women's magazine. I don't know if men read a women's magazine. That's one thing. But the other, and they also have to make the decisions. But also the women have to have the confidence that yes, they will get these jobs and they will get. And I think in what I can see in Germany, the women are there in some of these positions. The German church is a very different church from other parts of the world, but already in the number of people, like the Bishop of the Diocese of Münster employs 60,000 people. 60,000 people. So the churches in Germany are the second largest employer after the government.
Wow.
Yeah.
Miriam Valence, we could go on and on. Thank you very much indeed. I've really enjoyed it.
It's lovely to be here.
Thank you. Well, I did say you'd be entertained, and I hope you agree that I was right. Thank you for joining us in another of our Bishop Vincent Presents. I look forward to others in the future. Bye-bye for now.